Dark bleatings, everyone. Hopefully I have finally figured out how to frame this so that my head doesn't look like a potato, but with my phone in landscape instead of like portrait, for some reason I look extra round in the head and face region, which I guess I am. But anyway, so I'm reviewing Elemental Forces, which is an anthology from Flame Tree Press, edited by Mark Morris today, and dedicated book reviews are a thing I wasn't planning to do on the channel, but I have done the odd few. But I've found that like when I get to talk in depth about a book, I really enjoy it. So I don't think that these are ever going to be the most popular videos, and by popular for me I mean, you know, over 100 views, but I really enjoy talking about books, and so I'm gonna. So this anthology contains stories by many authors that I have heard of, a few that I have read and already like, and then a lot of them were completely new to me, so even if I had heard of them, maybe hadn't read their work before. And I did write a whole dedicated review on the website about this, and I did comment on every single story, so I'm going to do that here because I do think it deserves it, and I didn't want to pick and choose which author stories to talk about really, because overall it's a really strong anthology. And I guess the purpose of doing a book review is to share my thoughts and hopefully, you know, tell you guys about a book that you might enjoy as well. And my favourites are probably not going to be everyone's favourites, and vice versa, whatever I mean by vice versa in that context. So the first story in the book is called The Peeler by Poppy Z. Brite, which is Billy Martin's other writing name that they write by. And the less said about this one the better. I just said I'm going to talk about every story, and I am going to mention every story, but the less said about this one the better, because, you know, it's short, I don't want to give spoilers. I will say this, there's quite an air of something is horribly off immediately, and it's not very often that I get to see someone flayed. Next up we have The Entity by Nicholas Royle. Sorry, just want to make sure I don't mispronounce and butcher absolutely everyone's names. This one was really creepy. This is about a guy who's house sitting, and he starts to think that there's something in the house with him because things are moving around, his bed's messed up after he's already made it, and, you know, his computer files are disappearing and things of that nature. And it went in an unexpected direction, and I really enjoyed it. It was like super creepy and atmospheric, and then it dropped my jaw towards the end. Okay, the next story is called Nobody Wants to Work Here Anymore by Christina Henry, and I will say, typically speaking, Christina Henry's books haven't really been my cup of tea. People buy them for me a lot as presents because she did those dark Alice novels, and I love Alice in Wonderland. If that's something you guys might not know about me, but I am quite obsessed with the book and the original Disney film, the animated one. So people assume that I enjoy dark Alice stuff as well, but I actually really don't. I don't like the Tim Burton versions. I don't really like any twisted versions of Alice. I'm a purist, I guess, in that respect. I don't think you really need to make it more twisted. I think you kind of like lose the twistiness if you go too hard with it. Does that make sense? Anyway, so I haven't really enjoyed much of Christina Henry's work in the past. However, this story was meaningful to me because I've worked in customer service for almost my entire working life, in an array of different sort of customer service roles, and there was just something about reading about these people in this burger place and how soul-sucking and destroying customer service jobs can be that really hit home for me. And it starts with someone there is obsessed with the idea that they've seen a rat, and it just devolves. It's really like humorous but in a really messed up way, so like that was like a highlight of the book for me. I really enjoyed that one, and I was really happy to be surprised to like a Christina Henry story that much, which has made me want to read more of her work now. Maybe I'll branch out of like the Alice stuff and see what else she's got going, because I did really enjoy this one. This next one I really loved as well. This is right up my street for sort of like subgenre and themes and stuff. It's called The Scarecrow Festival by Tim Major, and it's about this guy called Andy. Yes, Andy, who is invited to this like quite exclusive event, like this Scarecrow festival in this little town by an old friend of his called Gary, but they haven't spoken in years and years, so they're not really friends anymore. So Andy's sort of surprised to receive this invitation, but he's happy and willing to go. He's got nothing else going on, but it is a little bit odd. And the scarecrows are really cool. Like, everyone's making these scarecrows for a bonfire, I think, if I remember correctly, and the scarecrows are all like modelled after someone, like a celebrity, or like something meaningful to the person, or whatever it is. And then the further you go, the more you think, you need to get out, Andy. Something fucky. So yeah, that one just got increasingly creepy and like worrisome, so I really enjoyed that one as well. The next one is called The Wrong Element by Dries. This one, I will admit, wasn't a favourite for me, but that's because I was a little bit confused, and that's easy to do with me, I'll be honest. I am quite easily confused. Sometimes if I'm struggling to focus reading, and you know, like when you realise that you've been reading a page but you haven't absorbed the page and you've got to go back, that happens to me quite a lot, and I think that maybe that's what happened to me when I was reading this story. Through no fault of the story, I was, you know, I always have a lot on my reading list, and sometimes I am trying to read a bit fast. But I will say this one is like a tangled web. And I think in my written review I wrote this like a tangled web that starts to untangle, but then you wish it didn't untangle, because the more it untangles, like the worse things get. So that's a really, really vague overview of this story. I think people who enjoy stuff that they have to like think about a little bit more would really like dig this one. It's just that that's not where my headspace was when I read it, but it's a really well written story, and it was a complete change of like pace and tone as well, which I thought was, that's another thing I want to comment on actually near the end, is the editing style from Mark Morris, but we'll do that after we talk about the stories. But yeah, I thought it was really well placed in the anthology, and it was like a good fit for variety. Mr. Reaper by Annie Knox was the next one. Now, you all know I love Annie Knox, both as a writer, and recently we've come to be friends, I would like to think. We talk quite a bit on the Instagrams and stuff. This one again, completely different like tonal shift for the book, because most of the stories, even if they've been humorous, have been a bit more serious, whereas this one feels, I feel like this could be like a Goosebumps episode, or something like that, you know. Anyway, like an anthology sort of episode in a show. But anyway, it's about a girl who's really depressed, and she makes somewhat of a botched suicide attempt, or like, she hasn't died, but if she doesn't do anything, she probably will. And a Reaper appears, but it's not what you expect of a Reaper. So the story is so like, I'll be honest, originally I did think that this was going to be kind of like stereotypical of a Reaper kind of story, or someone like suddenly regretting the decision they've made, and like the Reaper's evil, and like I thought it was going to be like that whole kind of thing, but it really wasn't. It was a complete different direction, something quite new done with a Reaper as well, because, you know, I said Reaper, you all pictured a Reaper. This isn't that. So yeah, this was like really different for the sort of story that Annie was writing. She did something different with like the material, so I really enjoyed that one as well. Laurel Hightower's stories next is called The Call of the Deep, and this one I actually found quite scary. In fact, if you guys have got any recommendations for sea creatures or stuff that's lurking underwater kind of horror stories, I would love to hear them, because I'm realizing that I haven't read nearly enough of those types of stories, and also that I find them really scary, so I would love some recommendations. But this one is about a woman that works in one of those, it's like a deep sea research center, I think, and it's got one of those wet pools, you know. In the only comparison I can think where I've actually seen this in a film, you know, Deep Blue Sea, they've got like that pool, and it's like pressurized, so like they're under the water, but there's like, you know what I mean. And she sees something like lurking in it, some that shouldn't be there, and then realizes that the research facility isn't actually what she thought it was, and it just gets scary. I was really scared. I'm not often scared, by the way, because I read, I don't know, on a good week I read like 2 to 4 books, and it's always horror, it's all horror, so I'm not I'm not very easily frightenable. That's a word, I've decided. Next up, The Plague by, I'm so sorry, I know I'm gonna fuck this up, and I did look up how to say it and I just can't. Luigi Musolino, I think that's how I say his name. I'm so sorry if I've messed that up. Yeah, so this is a story about an anti-vax, anti-farm kind of guy, not farmers in farming, like, and farmer, big farmer, doesn't trust modern medicine basically, and he comes down with something that should be eradicated but isn't, and refuses to do anything that's recommended. I thought I knew where this story was going. I did not. This yet again, author surprised me with the direction this went in. Also, I think it's quite relevant and topical because there is a lot of I think since 2020 the rise of sort of like anti-vax rhetoric has been on the up. I'm not commenting either way on it. I personally trust scientists and doctors that tell me when vaccines are safe. However, I do also believe in freedom of medical decisions. I can't think of the term for that, but I think you should be able to decide what you do with your own body. The next one is called Jack-a-Lent, and it's by Paul Finch, and this one I'm really excited about because, right, this wasn't my favourite in the anthology, I'll admit to you. It wasn't a favourite. However, I'm really excited about it for other reasons. So it's about a guy, a criminal actually, that wants to confess something to a priest, and the priest probably isn't expecting to hear what he hears. There's some stuff going on, and the thing that I think that Paul Finch is really good at is merging like typical British thriller and cop procedural type stuff with supernatural otherworldly elements. He's really good at like a detective story and infusing it with horror, so I think his work probably appeals to like thriller fans, people who enjoy like cop dramas, and also people who like horror. There's like, he's got a lot to offer in his writing, but the reason I'm really excited about this story is because it feels like a tie-in to a novel he recently a novella, sorry, that he recently released called All the Devils Are Here, which I will be reviewing in a later video. But yeah, there were some similar threads and themes there, so I'm hoping that he's like just sort of making a mini multi-universe out of it. Okay, next up, there's a story called Gwendolyn, Kiste, and this was one of my favourites. I loved it so much. It was so disturbing. The Only Face You Ever Knew is what it's called, and it's about a couple, Catherine and Veronica, and one day Veronica just disappears, doesn't come home, and obviously, I forget the names, Catherine is really concerned and goes to the police, and when they track Veronica down, they find that she's with her parents, who she cut off years ago because they're homophobic, didn't accept her relationship and stuff. And so Catherine's really confused by this, and so when she goes to get her or to see her, Veronica doesn't know who she is, doesn't remember her. And I just, that kind of, I think that one, there was a lot under the surface of that one. So on the face of it, it's a really good disturbing story about something's happened to someone with their memory, and there's possibly some slight folk horror leaning in this. I feel it could go a lot further with it, but that isn't really what the point of the story. But there's definitely something supernatural like lurking, and obviously the parents are malicious, but the other thing I really liked about it is that and maybe I'm reaching with this, but I felt like another layer to this was about sort of like medical fear about, you know, like there are disorders you can get, diseases and things, especially as you age, that fuck with your memory. And I think that a worst fear for me is that one day my husband doesn't know who I am and he's looking at me and I'm a stranger to him, and I can't even imagine the heartbreak that I would go through for something like that with somebody that I love so much. So I felt like it really tapped into some very real world serious stuff, and that's where the horror was coming from for me. I won't say how it ends or anything. Gwendolyn doesn't, you know, like completely annihilate us and our emotions, but it was, yeah, that one scared me for like multiple different reasons. And it was beautifully written, and their relationship was lovely also. That's a thing that I really enjoy, because I don't know, maybe maybe this is all genres of fiction, but you don't normally see like really beautiful relationships. I think outside of this, my favourite one is probably, I can't remember their names, but the couple from The Cabin at the End of the World. I loved that family, and that's the most attached I've been. And this one, so I'm not saying they don't exist, just that couples that like really get me in the feelings, and I'm like, ee, like squeeing, you know, that kind of relationship. They Eat the Rest by Jim Horlock is the next story. Complete change of pace and tone again. It was very humorous in a really sick way, and because it was funny, I didn't expect it to get so grisly. But this is about a group of sort of upper class people dining. They're just dining, and their hunger seems insatiable. And I think it's a comment on the, I think like whether it was intentional or not, it reads to me like a comment on the ever-growing wealth divide and sort of like financial disparity between the richest and poorest people in this nation. But yeah, I really enjoyed this one. As horrid as the themes were, and I do get angry about things, this one felt like light to me, but because of how horrific it gets. The next one is by Paul Tremblay, funnily enough. It's called The Note, and it's about a couple that are walking past a house that seems abandoned, but there is a light on in there, and it's all overgrown. It's like the only house in the neighbourhood that looks, you know, sort of derelict and neglected, and there's a note on the door, and they're really curious about it, and they're dying to know what it says. So the husband kind of hangs back and keeps watch while the wife goes to read the note. And then when she rejoins him, she will not tell him what the note says. And then after that, she goes a little bit weird. And I won't tell you any more about it there, otherwise I'm like verging into telling you the whole story. But again, this one really plucked at my sort of relationship fears, because not in the relationship I'm in now, thankfully, but in the past I've been in relationships where someone suddenly starts acting shady, and it's just like it's the most horrible hit to your self-esteem when you're being convinced by someone that they're not being shady, or they're trying to convince you of it, and you don't really have anything to actually go on. You know, like you haven't got like an example of something that they're doing specifically, apart from that you're getting a bad feeling. So that one really tapped into that for me and stressed me out. The next one's by one of my other favourites, Tim Lebbon, Unmarked it's called. This one was really cool. I loved the idea, and I'd love to see this expanded, if Tim maybe like did this as a novella or something. It's such a fun idea. So it's about a ghost who is friends with this old guy called Ronnie, an old living guy. And the ghost kind of like hasn't moved on, I think, because doesn't know where his body is. He was never found, so something like obviously happened to him, and he's kind of like searching for it, and in doing so he's finding other bodies of like murder victims and stuff, and then he tells Ronnie, and Ronnie tells the police. And so it's kind of like it's almost like a buddy cop kind of feel to it, but also with like these really sinister undertones because of why they're friends and because of like why the ghost is around. And yeah, I really enjoyed it. It was just such a fun idea, and I was like wavering between like really enjoying, as in like this is fun, and then like oh no. So yeah, it got me in the feelings again, that one. And it was quite light on the horror in terms of like how scary it is, but the concept initially is quite horrifying, so I think it just worked really well. Real good fit for the anthology. Red Meat Flag by David J. Schow, or Show, I'm so sorry, I don't know how to pronounce the surname. Sorry David if you see this. This is the next one, and this is another one in the book that's one of the more thought-provoking ones that requires a little bit more introspection and reflection on the story to understand it. Like, not that it's like really convoluted or complicated or anything, but it's just something that like you'll be thinking about it for a while. And it's really short. It's one of the shortest in the book, so I'm a bit hesitant to say anything really about the plot of it, because if I tell you, I've kind of told you the whole story. But I felt like this one was about perception versus like objective reality and how things can be interpreted. I know that sounds super vague, but I really enjoyed it, and I'm still thinking quite a lot about it. And I'm sorry I can't really tell you more. It's just I really want to, like, I really, really love this anthology, and I would love for more people to pick it up and then talk to me about it when they've read it, because I would love more people to talk about these stories with. But yeah, I don't want to like spoil the stories for you at the same time, so I'm really sorry if I'm being a bit too vague on some of them, but such a fine line between a non-spoiler review and then accidentally telling you the entire story. This next story is really weird. It's by PC Verrone. It's called A Review of Slime Tutorial, the Musical. This was such a weird story, delightfully weird. It's about it's written like a theatre review from someone who's gone to see a musical, and there's this big sort of like amorphous blob slime thing that sort of proceeds to consume the other characters as the play goes on, but you don't know if it's special effects or if there is some sort of weird slime creature. And I think because it's written from a review standpoint, it's impossible to be sure either way, although I have my suspicions about what's going on. But this one gets quite funny because of the viewpoint, because of what the reviewer is seeing. So like, if all this is real, it's really funny, the idea that a reviewer was just sat there taking notes on it. But yeah, yeah, that was a really, really fun one, and again, like, completely different to everything else in the book. The Doppelganger Ballet by Will Maclean is the stuff of nightmares. It's about a guy who learns how he's gonna die. And that concept alone is horrible. I don't think I would want to know. I don't think I would want to know when or what or how or whatever. It's that's the tip of the iceberg for this story. So I just found this one really disturbing, and once again I really can't tell you anything about it apart from I was disturbed. 8 Days West of Plethora by Verity Holloway is the next one. I don't know why I said it like that. I think it's the word plethora. This is about a guy who's on a quest. That's how I kind of saw it. He's on a quest, and it was a bit of a weird one because the story takes its time unfolding exactly what kind of horror this actually is. It's a horror anthology, so I knew it was coming, because no story in this anthology like isn't in the horror genre in some way or somewhere on some level. But I was really trying to unravel this one to figure out like where the horror was going to come from, because initially it seemed like a quest story. I was not expecting absolutely horrific body horror grisliness that turns up, so that's all I'll say about that. Oh, hello. The Daughters of Canaan by Kurt Newton is absolutely insane. It's a totally insane story that evokes sort of Egyptian mythology and all kinds of stuff. It's about this lady that thinks that she's going mad, or she doesn't really think she's going mad. She's believing what she's seeing, but she knows that no one else would believe this. She keeps seeing men with like dogs' heads, like they've got dog heads instead of human heads, and no one else seems to be seeing them, but they're like out in the public and things, and she confides this in a co-worker, and then from there things get even wilder. It was like, and when I say something like a nut story, I always mean that as a compliment, because it was just so out of left field and weird, and you know, infusing elements of mythology that we all kind of know and love, or we've heard of bits of it. I was looking things up afterwards to see how more disturbed I wanted to be by ancient tales. But yeah, that was a really fun one and completely unexpected. A House of Woe and Misery by Andy Davidson. This is one of my favourites. It's the apocalypse. So the world ending scenario in this is absolutely horrible, and I'm not going to tell you where it is, but yeah, this you'll know if you've watched my channel ever that I absolutely love the apocalypse. It's just my favorite. It's just, I don't know why, I don't know what that says about me that I enjoy stories about the world ending so much, but yeah, I was really excited about this one, and it really didn't let me down. And now for the final story, I Miss You Too Much by Sarah Langan. that's still giving me nightmares. And guys, I can't stress this enough, and I'm not exaggerating when I say this, this is one of the scariest stories I've ever read in my entire life. And even if, and this isn't the case, but even if everything else in the book sucked, I would still recommend it on that story alone. And, you know, luckily, everything in this book is enjoyable. But this one is my favourite in the anthology because it's terrifying. And it's made me an instant Sarah Langan fan. I've heard of Sarah Langan. I thought that I'd read Sarah Langan before, but now I think I confused her with someone else in the past, because I don't think I have, but I'm going to now. Oh, so this story I read at night before I went to sleep, and it was a mistake. Should have read it with all the lights on in the middle of a blazing summer day, and I still would have been scared. This is about a woman whose mother's health is rapidly deteriorating, and she lives on her own. And so, like, this daughter feels kind of like obligated to go take care of her in her final days. And it's really quite a traumatic situation because her childhood wasn't great, this mother isn't great, and I just felt like this relationship was depicted so well. Like this there's a whole lot of like the daughter feels really obligated and indebted to her mother, and like she owes her like this care and attention and love and everything. And it's like it's twisted, you know, like they don't have, like the daughter in this scenario didn't have the upbringing that a child should have from a parent. She feels too responsible, and I just, yeah, I thought that was just captured so accurately and beautifully, and I think unfortunately a lot of people would relate to it, but that's what's so powerful about the writing. So she goes to her childhood home, and she doesn't like this place. It gives her a bad feeling, and I guess I don't want to spoil anything because everything you find out is so increasingly scary that I don't really want to even, like, I don't even want to tell you what the first thing is, because I feel like if you read it you'll really get a lot more from it if you don't know anything. But it was a bit like, oh, that's a bit unnerving, that's not right, that's a bit worrying, and then it went from that to, oh my god, I'm terrified. So Sarah Langan is an incredible writer, because this wasn't just like unease and, oh, that's made me a bit nervous or I'm a bit disturbed. This was like, I was telling my husband, I'm really scared of this story I'm reading, and then for days afterwards I kept bringing it up. I was like, a story is like got in my head and it's scaring me, and if I think about it at night, he's going away in a few days. I'm gonna be in the house on my own, and I'm gonna think about it. So a last note that I want to make about this, and why I think it's such a good anthology outside of that all of the individual stories are really good, is because Mark Morris is a talented, hardworking editor, and I don't think that editors get enough credit for anthologies. I always hear people talk about stories, and I've been guilty of it, just talking about the stories and then completely neglecting the editor when I'm reviewing an anthology, which is nuts because the editors put this together. And it's one thing to compile a bunch of really good short stories that you think people will enjoy. It's another skill entirely, and a whole other round of like hard work and consideration to pick good stories that fit well together, where you haven't really repeated anything, and that is a lot harder to do than you think. And as someone who's now been on the editing side of 2 anthologies, I can now attest to what a challenge that actually is, because we had the last one, I worked on a werewolf anthology, we had over 300 submissions and only 4 places, because we had a few authors that we'd invited into the book as well already, so their stories were already, we had them, they were locked in. And then you're faced with, so first of all, had to read over 300 stories, which I'm not complaining about, that was a pleasure to do. It's just that is a lot to keep track of. So I was keeping notes on what all the stories were about, and then you have to narrow them down into rounds. And say you have 3 stories. So for example, the werewolf anthology I worked on, we were hoping to find in the open submissions things that were just a bit outside of the box for a werewolf story, and we had several that were set in space, and that's really great. And we liked all of the space stories were really good, all deserving of a place. But you can't just give the 4 places in the anthology to space set stories, because otherwise your anthology's samey. So then that was coming down to and they were all equally good. That was the thing, they were all equally good stories. So then you're like, well, how do I pick one of these? So then you have to start weighing it up against everything else in the book. Like, is there already a first person story? Is there already an epistolary story? Like, you know, things like that. You have to start considering the tense that the story's written in, the viewpoint it's written in, things like that, and it's hard. And then you've got things like, you know, do you want a little bit of humour in there to balance out the more savage stories? And then which order do you put everything in so that the book flows really nicely, so that each new story feels really fresh and different to the last? And so, like, there's a whole, I'm not saying that I necessarily have achieved this, I don't know, that would be for readers to decide, but I'm just saying I understand now how much more goes into this than you'd think. So if you pick up an anthology and almost everything in it is a smash hit for you, every story is like a fresh reading experience for you, that's the mark of a really good editor. So yeah, I just wanted to make sure that, like, I commend Mark's work here as well. What a great combination of people working together on a book. So yeah, I don't like ratings and rankings, as you know. I find them quite arbitrary, but this was a very easy 5 out of 5 for me. It's one of the best anthologies I've read this year. One of my favourite anthologies, full stop, actually. One of the best just in general. So yeah, I wholeheartedly recommend it. I know this is a cliche thing to say, but there's something in there for everybody. And yeah, definitely make sure that, if nothing else, you read Sarah Langan's story, because subscribe. If Kaylee doesn't hit 1,000 subscribers by Christmas, it won't be Santa that comes. I'll call Krampus. So I hope you enjoyed this book review. If you've read this, or you've read any of the stories, or you're a fan of any of the authors in here, let me know in the comments, talk to me about stuff. And if any of these stories in particular sound like super cool to you, let's talk about it. I'd love to, you know, if you want a little bit more information on any of these that I haven't given in the video, I'd be happy to go into it in the comments, and I could just warn people that there's slight spoilers for plot or whatever. But I will be back with another video soon. I will be posting every Thursday, Saturday and Sunday from now on. So yeah, I will see you on tomorrow with another video. Bleed!